And away we go. It's the DFS Early Bird presented by Awesemo.com. Dan Strafford, Adam Scher along with you on this Wednesday morning, getting ready for a 9-game NBA slate. Adam, how you doing?
Doing pretty good. Looking forward to. I really like these 6, 7, 8, 9 game slates that we've been having.
I agree. I will. I want to ask you a question here. You've gotten more and more into MME this year, projections and Excel work and the like. How much has the early tanking, I guess is the best way to say it, the teams that have, rest and players that are injured, and has that changed your approach the past couple of weeks, or is it still just trying to stay as tight to news as you possibly can through 7 o'clock each and every night?
It hasn't really changed much for me. I mean, this season, there's been that kind of stuff all season long. So it's not like when we, years ago, it used to be really bad this time of year, but it wasn't bad earlier in the year. So it was like a whole culture shock thing. Now it's kind of just like that all season long. I don't think it's been that bad this year recently, and we've at least been getting the news early. So far, it's actually been, I think, like a pretty mild March compared to how it normally is.
Yeah, I feel like it's been more widespread, but not as bad.
Right. And it just hasn't – we just haven't had the stuff as frequently where it's like, these 3 guys aren't playing, but we're telling you 5 minutes after tip.
Right. And those integrity fees for gambling, I'm sure there's some chatter going on in NBA offices that are trying to figure this all out as we roll forward. But I do find you're dealing with more data this year, which may be better, in fact, because it's more populated. So when things change, it's easier to pivot than when you're maybe building by hand or building a smaller set of lineups from a smaller set of data points. But just was intrigued whether or not it's changed your approach at all. And it's going to get worse before it gets better. I hope everybody knows that over the next couple of weeks, as the season winds down, you're just going to have players that don't play. And hopefully we get news. Hopefully that's all given to us ahead of time. But there are going to be some casualties along the way. Just hope you don't hit those landmines as we roll through. We're going to go position by position, as we always do here on the DFS Early Bird. That's going to be point guard on through center. We do use DraftKings as our jumping off point. We will touch on FanDuel if there are any drastic discrepancies that we need to touch on. But Adam, you will have the DFS strategy show right in the morning. So it's you and Josh at 9:15. And then you're on with Dave at 5. And Dave's writing the deep dive, I assume, on Wednesday?
Yep.
Okay. So that's your programming note. And then you have Live Before Lock with typically Spags and Ed Fear there leading you up to Lock. Not surprising by the name. And if you're a member of Awesemo and you haven't yet seen, the baseball channel is up and running on Slack chat. Josh Engerman looking for suggestions or questions on what exact content. Don't be surprised. It's going to be very similar to the NBA in structure and style, but looking to see what people are looking for on an everyday basis. So if you're a member, you'll want to head on over there. If you're not, use the promo code EARLYBIRD, one word, to get yourself 50% off your first month at Awesemo.com.
Should also have some MLB preview articles up by Monday.
Oh, nice. Look at that. And then probably worth talking through some podcast material therein as well. I'm sure those talks are ongoing. But don't forget also that you can watch us over on YouTube, as some of you are watching here. If you're on iTunes, subscribe and leave a comment, leave a rating. Same over on YouTube. Like this video, leave a comment, leave a rating where you can. We do appreciate it. With that said, let's dive into this 9-game NBA slate. We'll roll through pretty quickly here. First look across the board as we go through. You do have a bunch of Q tags across multiple positions here. CJ McCollum is out. I think Drew Holiday is still out.
He is.
He will remain out. I know he was potentially coming back this week. I'm surprised they're even entertaining that at this point, but maybe he wants to get back and dust off some of the cobwebs before the season ends. But taking a look at point guard, we do get Russell Westbrook back, and he has a matchup with Toronto. He's at 10-3. He's down to 10-3. Cheapest he's been in recent memory. I know he was at 10-8 last time he played, suspended last game. He's here at 10-3. You have Harden against Memphis at 11-3 and Kyrie against Philadelphia at 9-1. These are all three elite point guards, but they are not in the easiest matchups. There are holes in each of these teams, and obviously lots of changes for all of them, to be honest. Embiid injured for Philadelphia. For Toronto, you've had Marc Gasol added to the roster here. And Memphis, you've lost Gasol and you've lost other pieces along the way. Any of these three pique your interest here? Or are these guys that obviously have their upside in GPPs, but you'd rather stay away for the most part at point guard on Wednesday?
I mean, 10,300 for Westbrook is just I don't know. I was trying to get Fantasy Cruncher up to go back and see if he's like been that price all season long, and I would be shocked if he has. It's probably been years since he's been this inexpensive. Christmas Day against Houston, I think that he was 10-3 then, but outside of that,
2013 or
no, yeah, I mean, I think it was like one of those like they just made the pricing really soft because it was Christmas.
Oh, the 5-game slate. Yep.
Yeah. Yep. So he was 10-2 like early in the season against Sacramento, like in November, but the point stands. I mean, it's just way too cheap because he gives you such even in a tough matchup against Toronto, he gives you such a high floor, and he still can go out there and get you 60, 70 points against anyone. So his bad games are typically in the 50-55 range where that doesn't kill you at 10-3. So really like him in any format. Harden against Memphis, it's tougher to get there, especially when he's more expensive than Westbrook. I would think it's easier to get to him on FanDuel just because of the way roster construction is there. But on DraftKings, I doubt that I really get there. D'Antoni also apparently hinted at he said he can't rest Harden, but he suggested that Harden will play about 34 minutes a night from here on out. I don't believe that necessarily, but it's at least worth keeping in mind when you're talking about trying to find $1,000 for Harden over Westbrook.
And let's not kid ourselves. The West is a mess when it comes to the standings, and the Rockets are 4 games out of last place. Eighth seed in the West. Not saying that things are going to change that drastically over the final couple of weeks, but if you rest Harden or you pull back on his minutes, a couple of losses here and there, and you're drastically changing your trajectory here in the playoffs. So it'll be intriguing to see exactly what they do with Harden and how they roll forward with that. The rest of point guard, tons of talent. 9-game slate. We have lots of ways we can go. Alfred Payton's up to 8K. He's been amazing, though. He's been absolutely amazing. Orlando, not the easiest of matchups, not the toughest either, but 8K is a hefty price tag to spend there. You have Mike Conley at 7,900. Donovan Mitchell is at 7,800, has a prime matchup with the Knicks. Chris Paul, is Kyle Lowry out again? Do we have an actual word? Questionable. So questionable with an ankle. And then you get into the mid-tier with the likes of Bledsoe and Jalen Brunson. I know Justice Winslow is already ruled out along with Rodney McGruder there in Miami. And that brings me to somebody who I somehow or another was on Monday night, which is Goran Dragić. And you have McGruder out. You have Winslow out. We'll get back to the mid-tier, but I want to touch on Dragić here. The numbers bear out season long that San Antonio hasn't been great on defense against point guards. But this defense has vastly improved over the past couple of weeks, right? This is a San Antonio Spurs team that I don't even think really resembles what we saw early on in the year.
Yeah, they've been really weird this year where they started out absolutely terrible, and then they were good for a stretch, and then they went back to being awful, and then now they're playing really well again. So I don't really know what to make of it. We do know that they're a slow team. Miami's a slow team. So I don't really expect, a repeat performance from Dragić, but him getting, upper 20s in minutes is a good sign. And, it's still a reasonable play, just not as appealing a matchup as it was before.
Yeah, it feels like a box score watching play where you try to roll them out 2 games in a row and hope for the best. What about the tier I sort of skipped over here a bit? You have Doncic, Alfred Payton, Conley, Lillard without McCollum on the floor at 8,800, Mitchell at 7,800. Any of these guys seem to be worthy of some more scrutiny for Wednesday slate?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you have Lillard, who this season without McCollum on the floor has a 39% usage rate. He's averaged 1.5 points per minute. So, obviously you can look there. He's 8,800 in a perfectly fine matchup against Dallas. Luka Dallas isn't missing anyone, but he's just a $10,000 player who continues to be $8,900. Portland hasn't been great defensively lately. And I mean, we just know the kind of production and upside that you get from Luka. So, he's someone that I always look to roster. And then Kyrie facing Philadelphia in what should be a very competitive game has implications in the Eastern Conference seeding. And Philadelphia has not been great defensively against ball dominant guys all season long.
Yep.
But one thing that stands out is that they have been towards the bottom of the league in pick and roll points per possession allowed. Kyrie isn't a super high frequency pick and roll guy, but he is one of the most efficient in the league. So I think that he should have some success in this particular matchup. I would still put him behind Lillard since McCollum is out, and I think he's very comparable to Luka, just because they produce on a similar per minute basis. But I think all three of those guys are very high upside options.
Embiid is back Wednesday, so a little bit more rim protection than you may have gotten for Philadelphia otherwise, but still there's a lot of options here at the top end. Going to come down to roster construction and exactly how the other positions play out. We talked about Dragić in the mid-tier, I mentioned at least some of these other names like Bledsoe and Brunson. Sexton is against Milwaukee. Anybody on the cheap end, let's say 6K or below, that you at least think should be on people's radars heading into this slate?
Satoransky at 5,600 against Chicago, I think, is just too cheap for a guy that plays 36, 37 minutes. Chicago's not good defensively. It's just a spot where he's really unlikely to kill you at that price point, and we know that he's capable of going out and getting you 40. So I would throw him in there. Sexton has like a 25, 26% usage rate recently, and he's in a huge pace-up spot against Milwaukee. So I think he's reasonable as well, but I would prefer Satoransky.
What are your thoughts on two guys, sub 5K, Dwayne Wade and Fred VanVleet? VanVleet got the start in for Kawhi Leonard. Do we ignore him here now that he's gone back to the bench, or does he get enough minutes here off the bench against OKC?
It depends on Lowry. If Lowry's out, then obviously go right back to VanVleet. If Lowry's in and Kawhi's in, then I think it's really tough to trust him because you just have so many bodies there now. As far as Wade goes, it's the same for Dragić. I think that the price tag's a little bit too low, assuming this game stays competitive. But I also think it's unlikely in this particular game flow and the pace of this game and the defensive matchup. It's pretty unlikely, I think, that either of those guys, win you anything. Like, I think I'd rather actually go to a DJ Augustine at 5,300 against the Pelicans than either one of the Miami guys. And you also have an absolute punt in Shaq Harrison at 3,200 against Washington.
There you have it. So San Antonio on the year, 22nd overall in pace, while the Miami Heat are 25th overall. So should be a slow-going affair there between those two squads as we continue on here. What's your take on Chris Dunn of late? Is it just something that he's not as good as he showed us to be earlier on the year? Minutes just haven't been there. Any particular take on Dunn here as the season winds down?
I think he's just not very good offensively.
Sure.
I mean, he's always been a good defensive player, but really going back to his time in Minnesota and, through this year with Chicago, he had that stretch where he was good offensively, but for the most part, he just hasn't been a good offensive player.
All right, let's move on to shooting guard, and we start at the top with our most expensive. We have Harden here again at 11.3, Bradley Beal at 9,400. It's amazing every time I talk about Beal. I keep waiting for his usage to be above 30, and I think it's been hanging around 27.5 or 28 all season long. And he just seems to find a way to put up gigantic totals. Now, I know last time out went 4 for 12, only went 0 for 3 from three-point range, and a loss to Utah, 15 points. But he's been stringing together some great fantasy performances for us, and we know he's going to shoot a ton against Chicago. Is 9,400 too expensive for you on DraftKings, or do you think that's somebody that at least you'll have in a player pool?
Yeah, I like the price tag there. He struggled against Utah, but if you want to take a positive away from that, he only played 30 minutes because the game was a blowout. He didn't play in the fourth. In competitive games, you're going to get 39, 40 minutes every night from Beal. He's playing out of his mind, close to a 30% assist percentage to go along with the 30% usage rate. And it's not that he's like incredibly dominant from a per minute standpoint. He's right around 1.3 points per minute. It's just that he plays more minutes than basically anyone. So it's really easy for him to put up these big games, especially when his price tag is still down at like 9,400. It's not a particularly deep position today either.
At least we know Brad Beal will suffer some sort of catastrophic injury at the beginning of next season because he played so many minutes this year. But that's fine.
Yeah.
Good old Washington.
Or he'll wait until John Wall finally gets back, and the Wizards have like a 1-year window before John Wall's too old to be any good, and they'll get hurt immediately.
And it's gonna be like a compacted tooth that infects his jaw, and it like will have nothing to do with basketball. But,
right.
All right, Mitchell against New York. You have DeRozan here against Miami, so we continue with that pace down game. You have Jimmy Butler against Boston. Brunson, we get pretty light pretty quickly, it feels like, here at shooting guard. So who are some of your favorite names?
Yeah, the position's not really good, but Zach LaVine, if he's questionable, if he suits up against Washington, I think you kind of have to like him in a huge pace-up spot against a really bad Washington defense. Already mentioned Satoransky at point guard, but he has shooting guard eligibility on DraftKings as well. Terrence Ross against New Orleans, like anyone that plays New Orleans and shoots is reasonable. Clearly the case with Ross. JJ Redick, I don't really want to chase the monster game that he had on Tuesday. This position's really bad. Hopefully some value opens up.
Yeah, it does feel over on FanDuel. You're probably paying up both times over at shooting guard with Beal and LaVine if he's in the contest as viable options. Beal is 10-3 on FanDuel, but still, what is that? That is 7th or 8th most expensive. It's not like he is one of the most expensive guys. He's behind Vucevic, Irving, Lillard, George, Westbrook, Embiid, Harden, and Giannis on the slate at, again, 10-3. So decisions to be made over there. You do have Luka Doncic eligible at shooting guard over on FanDuel and has a matchup with Portland here at 9,900. But any punt plays here that at least should be on our radar before we move on to small forward?
Not really. No.
Yeah, I didn't think so. I really didn't think so. You'd need some major shifts in players being out here for there to open up some shooting guard value. If Lowry's out, does Lin matter with Kawhi back? Like, does Lin become at least somewhat of a conversation at 3,900?
I don't think so. I think that he would end up still being behind Van Vliet and probably Norman Powell.
Right.
In rotation. And he's just been absolutely awful. So I don't think I would get there unless like Lowry and Leonard or Lowry and Green were out.
Right. That makes sense. Let's go to small forward next, where I haven't seen anything new on Giannis. He's out because of an ankle injury, but it did seem as though this was, well, LeBron's out. So we're going to keep Giannis out to make sure his ankle's okay. I haven't seen anything saying that Wednesday he would be out again. Have you?
No, I haven't.
So you have Giannis at 11-4, Paul George at 9-8. You do get Russ Westbrook back in this game in a matchup with Toronto, you assume. Matchup with Kawhi Leonard potentially here for Paul George. He's been probably the most consistent fantasy asset on the year, price point-wise and production-wise, it would seem.
Yeah, he's been really, really good. And he went through that stretch recently where he shot really poorly, but that got out of his system pretty quickly. Not a great matchup against Toronto, obviously, especially assuming that Kawhi plays. But George plays a lot of minutes. And on FanDuel especially, I think he'll be valuable just because the position generally lacks, a lot of talent. Like on FanDuel, you can't play Luka Doncic, you can't play DeRozan, you can't play Gordon, you can't play so many guys that you can on DraftKings.
Yep. Over on FanDuel, Paul George checking in at 11K, pricey enough. What about Kawhi Leonard on this slate? His price point of 8,400 on DraftKings, price point on FanDuel of 9,600. Any love for Kawhi against Oklahoma City, or would you rather stay away?
The price point, I think, is too low. He's not someone that I like rostering in tournaments just because he's generally not volatile enough in his production that he really wins you tournaments compared to other guys in his price range. And he's always popular, or he's normally popular. But I do like the matchup. It's a pace-up spot against Oklahoma City. He will have to deal with Paul George, which, obviously he's an excellent defender. But I just think for, 35, 36 minutes from Leonard at 8,400, he gives you a high floor at a weak position. Same goes on FanDuel, where he's still $1,400 less expensive than George.
All right, where else are you looking at small forward here? Tobias is 7,100 against Boston. Chetty Osman has been playing a ton of minutes for Cleveland, putting up double-digit shots most outings. He's been in the mid to high 30s in DraftKings points a few times over the past few days. What do you got in mid-tier or cheap value here at small forward that at least guys that, if you're writing, might be part of a write-up, or guys that are not yet eliminated from your player pool simply because of a lack of depth here?
Yeah, I think there's a few guys. You mentioned Chetty, who he's playing a ton. He's getting his shots up. He's playing well, and it is a pace-up spot against Milwaukee. So he's certainly in there. Trevor Ariza is only 4,600 against Chicago. That's a really cheap price tag for a guy that should play, 34 to 36 minutes. Jonathan Isaac's in a favorable spot against the Pels. I don't roster him all that often, but his price tag has started to come back down. And then you get a couple of value guys with Daniel House, 3,900 on DraftKings against Memphis. Eric Gordon will be sitting out, so House should get plenty of minutes here. And then Mario Hezonja in a terrible matchup against Utah. Not a particularly good player, but inexpensive and should play around 30 minutes.
Oh, minutes. How we love you in the NBA. But nonetheless, Hezonja is 3,700. Keep an eye on potential, news along the way. Hopefully we get something that does open up a little bit more than we've seen thus far. We hope that maybe a flu-like symptom can come through one of these teams. Impressive line by Mike Scott, by the way, on Tuesday night for the 76ers. Lots of 76ers had gigantic games. Mike Scott played 15 minutes, had 0 points and 1 rebound. That's impressive.
Yeah, that takes a lot.
That takes a lot of lack of skill to do that poorly. Power forward is up next, where Giannis is 11-4, Paul George, Kawhi, typical names that we've already talked about. You get into Randall, Aldridge, Kevin Love, Aaron Gordon. I don't know. Did we skip over talking about Giannis as a whole at small forward? Do you want to touch on him here as sort of the top price talent on this slate?
Yeah, I think we did skip over it. And if he plays, then obviously he's a good player. Like, I would prefer him to Harden. I think he has a higher ceiling than Westbrook. I'm not sure that he's worth $1,000 extra.
Yep.
But again, more valuable on FanDuel just because of the position. You can just rotate so many guys through small forward on DraftKings that you can't on FanDuel. So I think it would be, similar to Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, where he's just more valuable because of his position there.
All right. So again, keep an eye on injury news there. I don't see why he wouldn't play. It really felt like it was a situation where LeBron was announced. And I believe this was the order that LeBron was announced out first, and then Giannis was announced out by the Bucks, but it could be a bigger deal. They're saying they don't believe it to be a severe injury. What about Randall against Orlando? Aldridge here at 7,900. Aaron Gordon on the other side of this New Orleans matchup. Anybody in this 7K above portion of power forward seem intriguing?
Yeah, I think it's the kind of spot that Aaron Gordon should do well in. I really don't like when his price tag gets up over 7K, just because he generally doesn't really exceed that. But it is, a fast-paced game against, or an up-tempo game against New Orleans. It's a terrible New Orleans defense. Gordon should be able to contribute, in a lot of different ways. So I think that it's the kind of spot that I do like to roster him. Lauri Markkanen at 7,100 against Washington. I really have no idea what to do with this guy. Like, he's been absolutely awful lately.
Yep.
And the price tag has come down, though, is the thing that makes it tough. He was, 8,600 on DraftKings not that long ago. Now he's 7,100 against a Washington team that cannot rebound and cannot play defense. One thing that stands out is that his minutes have come down. Partially, if you look at game logs, Chicago's been involved in a lot of blowouts, but even in some more competitive games, you're seeing him track towards 30 to 32 minutes as opposed to 36 or 37. So that's something clearly to keep in mind. But with the price tag falling so quickly, it's still just a spot where I'm going to end up rostering some of him just because Washington's really bad.
Yep. What about the Bobby Portis or Jabari Parker revenge tour here against Chicago?
Oh, I hadn't even thought about that. Portis might come to play.
Portis might punch somebody, but
yeah, Mirotic isn't there anymore at least. But This is the second time they've played since the trade. They played like 2 days after the trade or something. Parker's been playing well and getting more minutes. Portis has been dropping off and getting less minutes. It's still not something that I'm confident projecting on a game-to-game basis because I very much think that it's a hot hand situation for these guys. Portis playing poorly does mean that his price tag has come down, and it makes me start to be interested in tournaments again because we know what happens when he does get 30 minutes. Parker has just played well as since coming to Washington. He actually had a pretty good quote the other day. He was interviewed after a game where he played well, and he just like straight-faced was like, yeah, I mean, I just think I've really improved this season. I mean, I wasn't even good enough to get on the floor for the Bulls, and now look at me. So, yeah, he's been playing well. I like both of them in tournaments. I would stay away from either one in cash games.
All right, what else do we have here at power forward? Siakam's at 6,800. Anthony Davis at 7K. He's been putting up points in his limited minutes. Do you see upside enough at 7K, or is he still too expensive for the 21 to 22 minutes we're getting?
I don't really see it on this slate. I think that it's at a point now where it's really slate dependent. But when you look at this slate, like you can't convince me that Davis has a higher ceiling than Lauri Markkanen. Aaron Gordon should play like 15 minutes more than Anthony Davis. LaMarcus Aldridge in a shitty matchup, but still should play 14, 15 minutes more. Al Horford is $1,100 less against Philly. So, and you have Siakam, who's $200 less. There's just too many guys in this price range that should play 12 to 15 minutes more than Davis.
All right. Larry Nance Jr. is questionable. I think Tristan Thompson is questionable as well. Last I checked, I think Kevin Love also with a back issue could be back for this one. Any of the Cleveland power forwards intrigue you against Milwaukee?
If Love's in, he's interesting because you would expect around 30 minutes, and he's like a 1.4 point per minute guy at a reasonable price tag. If he's out, then if him and Nance are both out, it becomes a mess. Obviously you can look to Marquise Chris. I wouldn't be confident that he replicates
you can look at him. I don't know that you want to roster him.
Right. I wouldn't be confident he replicates anything close to his 30 points from last time out. I would think that David Nwaba gets more minutes again as well if Love and Nance are both out.
And Nwaba and Siakam are two of my favorite names in NBA DFS, but you got to say them with authority. And Nwaba, it's just so good. And Siakam sounds like something you might cough up, or like a cat would cough up. Let's see. Anybody else want to scroll through here? Okay, go for it.
And again, this is purely just an upside tournament play from Washington's front court. But on DraftKings, Thomas Bryant has power forward eligibility, and he's down to $3,900. And so the most likely outcome is he plays like 18, 19 minutes.
Right.
And he's productive, but it's 18 or 19 minutes. But when you think about just, raw upside and you look at guys around him, like Ivan Rabb, Harkless, Tucker, Finney Smith, Darius Miller, like he clearly has a higher ceiling than all of those guys. So I think that he's, an interesting guy in tournaments just because he can actually win you a tournament if he plays well enough to get extra minutes.
I want to take a quick look at the box score from tonight's Milwaukee Lakers game. Mirotic played 24 minutes, had 23 points, 6 rebounds, and an assist. If Giannis is out, Mirotic at 4,900 against Cleveland, something you want to at least consider further?
Yeah, it would be really similar to how I felt about him against the Lakers. He would have played a few more minutes, I think, too, but he went to the locker room. He got hurt. But I think that he would be a good play. He was like 60% owned in some tournaments on Tuesday. I don't think he would be that good of a play. So I basically came in around like 30 to 40%, depending on the site. And I think it would be similar where I'm not even looking at it like I want to be overweight or underweight on him. I think he's a 30 to 40% play, and the field can do whatever they want to do.
All right, let's close it out with center. Embiid should be back. We know he's really good at basketball. So 10K flat here for Joel Embiid. Vucevic at 9.5, and then you get Gobert at 8,200 against the Knicks. Do you like Embiid here coming off a small injury that he's been dealing with over the past couple of weeks?
Yeah, I like him whenever he's this price. The argument against him would be that Vooch is $500 less and in a much better matchup, really fast-paced Pels team. No real front court defense to speak of outside of the 20, 21 minutes that Anthony Davis plays. Vooch, playing more minutes now too as Orlando tries to grab the 8 seed in the East, getting 34 to 36 minutes a lot more frequently. So Vooch really stands out. I would have him be, right behind him.
All right, what else do you have here at the upper end? Gobert's against New York. Capella is against Memphis, and I don't even know who's their start. It's not Noah still, is it?
Valanciunas.
Right, Joe Val is there. You have Capella here against Valanciunas and Memphis at 7,600, Nurkic at 7,100. And obviously on DK, we have all the MPE guys mixed in as well. But of the center only, Gobert, Capella, and Nurkic, anybody on the higher end here above 6K or let's say above 7K right now that you think is worthy of mentioning?
Nurkic for sure. He has only played 156 minutes without McCollum this season, but he has a 34.5% usage rate. He's averaged 1.35 points per minute. If you go back to last season, even if you put Lillard on the floor, Nurkic has a 30% usage rate without McCollum. So we really see a boost for him. It's a favorable matchup against Dallas. His price tag is pretty stupid for the kind of upside that he gives you. So he's pretty easily my favorite mid-range center.
All right. What about some cheaper options here, getting down to a Robin Lopez against Washington at 6,300. You also have DeAndre Jordan at 5,700 against Gobert, which may not seem like the primary matchup, but could be a double waiting for DeAndre Jordan. No, he had a rough matchup with Toronto, but could see some upside here. And Hassan Whiteside not playing enough minutes. Lopez, not seeing a ton of other cheap names here, but anybody in that mid-range that you want to point out before we close it out?
It gets pretty ugly once you get past Nurkic. I think that it's a slate where I'll probably have really concentrated ownership to those guys at center, but you can always take a flyer on like a $5,100 Bam or a $4,500 Pirtle.
Yeah, Pirtle, and you have Zizic down here. If all these guys end up being out, he's been getting the minutes, hasn't been doing a lot with it, but he's at 4,300, which I guess is a bit of an increase in price. Anybody else? Doesn't look like it. You're going to have Thomas Bryant here again at 3,900. You mentioned him over at power forward. And that probably closes us out. I think that does. So you've already basically answered the question I asked of you and Dave. 10K and above, you have Embiid, Westbrook, Harden, and Giannis. Of those four, if you're calling a building block of those four, who's your favorite?
With Westbrook at 10-3, it's Westbrook.
And then 9K or above, is it Vucevic? If you expand it to 9K and above, or is it Westbrook still?
It's Vooch by a hair.
Okay.
I would say if I can round up, I like Lillard more than all of them.
Okay. It's our podcast. Yes, you can round up all you like. So 8,800 Damian Lillard against Dallas without CJ McCollum, and Lillard had some interesting quotes after last game of just being aware he doesn't need to necessarily shoot more. He just needs to be aware that a guy who scores 20-something points a game is not there and needs to do a better job of leading the team. And as you said before, this is Lillard all in, trying to push the Trailblazers in the playoffs and keep what they have going potentially. And listen, Nurkic is there, and you hope that they utilize him here and they play him enough minutes. But again, to point out, Portland has the 4 seed, but they're just a game and a half ahead of San Antonio and a game and a half against Oklahoma City, and they're just 2.5 games ahead of LA. So lots can shuffle around here, and all of a sudden you're playing Golden State in the first round. Yep. Golden State's looked vulnerable this year, but I don't think anyone's thinking they lose in the first round of the NBA playoffs. So
yeah, I think that vulnerability will go away pretty quick.
Yeah, and you want to avoid that, and you probably want to avoid playing Denver at home. So all of a sudden that those 3, 4, 5, 6 spots really become that much more important for everyone. So you can always find Adam over on Twitter at ShipMyMoneyDFS, being a jerk to somebody, but that is why we love him. You also find him in Slack chat and writing at Awesemo.com. If you want to be a member, it's Awesemo.com. And then you use the promo code EARLYBIRD. That gets you 50% off your first month. As again, I've said, baseball around the corner. PGA is in full swing. NHL still ongoing. You get Alex's grades and the lineup builder. You get Josh's projections for NBA. And then lots of other content behind the paywall. Free shows over there on YouTube. If you would care to join us, please do so. Subscribe over there. Like this video. Leave a comment. Feel free to ask a question, and we'll do our best to answer it throughout the day. With that said, we wish you the best of luck on this 9-game Wednesday slate. You get EMAC and Lofty on Thursday, and then still determining Friday. I'm covering for EMAC for Saturday's show with Adam, so you'll hear me again for the Saturday AM podcast right here on Awesemo.com. You've been listening to the DFS Early Bird.